If you could have walked up to one of the old mountain men and asked him to give up everything he carried but one single thing, asked him to throw it all down in the dirt and keep only the one item he trusted his life to above all others, most folks today would bet he keeps the rifle. They would be wrong. A good many of those old men, the ones who lived the longest and ate the best, would have kept the knife. A plain knife. A fixed blade, bone-handled most likely, worn smooth from years in a hard hand. A thing you could buy for a couple dollars even back then, and that any fool would walk right past in a trading post without a second look. And that man would set down his gun and keep that little blade, and if you asked him why, he would tell you the truth that we have almost entirely forgotten. The gun, he might say, does one thing. The knife does everything else. And out here, it is the everything else that keeps a man alive. I have turned that over in my mind more times than I can count, sitting by a fire in country where the nearest other soul was a week's hard walk away, and every time I come back to the same conclusion the old men came to. They were not romantics. They did not keep that blade close out of love for the old ways or some stubborn pride. They kept it close because they had counted the cost in lives, had watched men die for the lack of the right tool at the right moment, and had learned the hard arithmetic of the wild written in the bones of those who got it wrong. When a man's own survival has taught him a lesson that brutal, he does not forget it, and he does not argue with it. He simply keeps the knife close and lives. I want to talk about that, because it cuts right to the heart of a misunderstanding that runs through how we think about survival today. We have come to believe that the powerful tool is the important tool, the loud one, the one that does the dramatic thing. The gun kills, and killing feels like the whole game, so the gun feels like the most important thing a man can own. But an old mountain man knew that killing was maybe 1 hour out of 1,000 hours spent in the wild, and the other 999 hours, the gun sat useless on his back, while the knife did the actual work of staying alive. A gun without powder is a club. A gun with a cracked stock or a fouled barrel is a stick. But a knife is a knife until the day it wears to nothing, and even then, you can put a new edge on it and go again. The old men understood that the humble tool that works every single day beats the powerful tool that works 1 day in 1,000. That is a kind of wisdom we have lost, and it goes far beyond knives. Let me tell you what that blade actually did for a man out there, day to day, because when you lay it all out, you start to see why he trusted it the way he did. It built his shelter. Every notch cut into a pole, every length of bark stripped for a roof, every stake sharpened to drive into the ground, the knife did that. And a man caught out in weather with no shelter is a man who can be dead by morning, and the knife was the difference. It made his fire. Shaving down a dry stick into a feather of curls fine enough to catch a spark, splitting a wet log down to the dry heart of it, scraping the rust off a piece of steel to throw sparks. The knife did that too. And fire in the cold is not a comfort. It is life itself. And again the blade stood between the man and the freezing dark. It fed him in ways the gun never could. The gun took the deer, yes, that 1 hour out of 1,000. But the knife turned that deer into food. It opened the animal and freed the meat and separated it clean off the bone. And a man who could not do that quick and right would lose half his kill to spoilage and waste. The knife cut the strips thin to dry into the trail food that carried him through the lean months. It dug the roots out of the cold ground when there was no game at all. It cleaned the fish, it split the marrow bone for the rich fat inside. It scraped the hide that would become his clothes and his boots, and the very pack on his back. Every bite of food that man put in his mouth had passed across that blade in one way or another. The gun made meat possible. The knife made meat real, and in the long, lean stretches when no game came at all, when the gun hung untouched for weeks, it was still the knife that kept a man fed, prying the edible bark, slicing the cattail root, gutting the fish from a trap line, scraping the last from a bone. The gun could go silent for a month and the man lived on. Let the knife be lost for a single day, and his whole world of food shut its door against him, and it mended him. A splinter driven deep, a thorn, a bit of arrowhead or shot that had to come out, the careful lancing of a wound gone bad before the poison spread, the cutting of cloth into bandages, the trimming of dead flesh from an injury so the living flesh could heal. The knife did all of that, and in a world with no doctor and no help for 100 miles, a man's blade was his surgeon. I have heard of men who saved their own lives with nothing but a sharp edge and a steady hand and the nerve to do what had to be done. The gun could not have helped them at all. The gun would have been so much dead weight while the man bled. It was the cheap little knife that brought him through. So you begin to see it. The old-timer did not trust the knife more than the gun out of some sentiment, some old-fashioned stubbornness. He trusted it because the cold arithmetic of survival proved it to him over and over. The knife touched every single part of staying alive: shelter and fire and food and water and clothing and medicine, and the 100 small repairs a man's gear needs to keep working. While the gun touched exactly one part, and that part only now and then. A wise man invests his trust where it pays out daily, not where it pays out rarely, no matter how dramatic the rare payout looks. And the old men were nothing if not wise about what kept them breathing. Now I will tell you the deeper thing, the part that really separates the old knowing from what we have today. It was not just that they owned a good knife, it was that they knew how to keep one. A blade is only as good as its edge, and an edge does not last. It dulls with every cut. And a dull knife is a dangerous and useless thing. It slips. It tears instead of cuts. It tires the hand and wastes the work. So the old-timer carried a stone, a little whetstone worn into the shape of his own hand from years of use, and he tended that edge the way a man tends a fire, constantly, a few strokes here and there through the day, never letting it go truly dull, so that his blade was always ready, always keen, always equal to whatever the next hour demanded. He could feel the edge with his thumb and know exactly how much life was left in it. He knew the angle to hold against the stone in his sleep. This was not a chore to him. It was a habit so deep it was part of who he was, the way breathing is. And it meant that his cheap little knife outperformed a rich man's fine one that sat dull and neglected in a fancy sheath. The tool was never the thing. The keeping of the tool was the thing. A $2 blade in the hands of a man who tended it beat a $20 blade in the hands of a man who did not, every single time, and the old men knew it. There is a lesson buried in there that runs far past knives, and I think it is the real reason this matters, the reason worth carrying out of these woods and into your own life. We have become a people who believe that buying the thing is the same as having the thing. We buy the expensive tool and we think we are now capable, when all we have done is spend money. The old mountain man knew the opposite. He knew that the capability was never in the tool, it was in the man, in the skill and the care and the knowledge of how to use the simple thing to its fullest. Give a skilled man a poor knife and he will thrive. Give a fool the finest blade ever forged and he will cut himself and lose it in a week. The old-timer poured himself into mastering the cheap, simple tool so completely that he needed nothing more. And that mastery was a thing no one could take from him. No thief could steal it. No fire could burn it. No hard winter could starve it out of him. He could lose every possession he had, and as long as he had his hands and his knowledge, he could make a new knife from a piece of scrap and start again. That is a kind of wealth we have nearly forgotten exists. The wealth that lives in the man and not in his things. You see it in how they chose the blade in the first place, too. The old-timer did not want the fancy knife, the one with the jeweled handle and the polished show. He wanted the plain one, the simple one, the one with nothing on it to break, no moving parts, no folding hinge to clog with grit and fail at the worst moment, no decoration to catch and snag. A fixed blade, a simple handle, a single piece of honest steel that could take an edge and hold it. He understood that simplicity is strength, that the more parts a thing has, the more ways it has to fail, and that out where failure means death, a man wants the tool with the fewest ways to let him down. The cheap, simple knife was not a compromise he settled for because he was poor. It was the deliberate choice of a man who had learned, through hard experience, that simple things survive and complicated things break. We chase the complicated and the feature-laden and the impressive, and the old men would have shaken their heads at us, because they had buried friends who trusted the impressive thing and were failed by it at the moment it mattered most. And the knife was always on him. This is a small thing that is not a small thing. The gun he might lean against a tree, set down to do other work, leave in the shelter while he went to the spring. But the knife rode on his belt or his neck every waking moment and slept within reach of his hand every night. It was never more than a grab away, because the old-timer knew that the emergency does not announce itself. The bear does not wait for you to walk back and fetch your blade. The slip on the icy rock that pins your arm does not pause while you consider where you left your tools. The knife was always there because everything could go wrong at any instant, and the one tool that could save him in nearly any of those instants was the one he kept closest. That habit, that bone-deep refusal to ever be parted from the blade, was itself a piece of the survival, as important as anything the knife could do once it was in his hand. Now I have not yet spoken of the knife as a thing of defense, and I have left it for last on purpose, because here is where most people would have started, and the old men would have ended. Yes, the blade was a weapon. When the powder was wet or spent, when the gun had spoken its one shot, and there was no time to load another, when the thing came close in the dark, it was the knife the man's hand fell to. A gun is a tool of distance. Up close, in the tangle, in the sudden terror of a thing already upon you, the gun is often worse than useless, too long, too slow, fired once and empty. The knife does not run out. It does not misfire. It does not need to be reloaded in the half-second a man has left. The old-timer knew that when it came down to the last and worst moment, the moment that decided whether he saw another sunrise, it would likely be the blade in his fist, and not the gun on his back that answered. So he kept it sharp and he kept it close, and he knew, with a grim certainty, that the humble tool he used to whittle tent stakes was the same tool that might one day be all that stood between him and the end. A man does not trust a thing more than his gun for whittling alone. He trusts it that much because it has served him in the hour when nothing else could. And here is the final piece, the one that sealed the old-timer's trust completely. He knew that if he ever lost his knife or broke it or wore it down to nothing, he could make another. From a shard of flint, from a piece of broken steel, from a sliver of bone or antler ground patiently against a rock, the man who truly knew the old ways could fashion an edge sharp enough to do the work. It might be crude, it might be ugly, but it would cut, and cutting was all he asked of it. This is the thing that finally lifts the knife above the gun in the old reckoning, because a man cannot make a gun in the wilderness. He cannot forge a barrel or mix powder or cast a ball from nothing out in the timber. Lose the gun and it is gone, and the man is reduced. But the man who knew blades was never truly disarmed, never truly without, because the knife was not really the steel object on his belt at all. The knife was the knowledge in his head of how to put an edge on the world, and that knowledge could not be lost or broken or stolen. He carried the real knife between his ears, and the thing on his belt was only its most recent body. That is why he trusted it beyond all else, not because the object was so precious, but because the object was replaceable by his own two hands and his own hard knowing, in a way the gun could never be. The most dependable tool is the one you can always make again, and of all the things a man carried, only the blade was truly that. There were 100 smaller things too, things so ordinary the old-timer never thought to name them, that altogether added up to why the blade was never out of his hand for long. It cut the cordage that lashed his gear and bound his loads. It carved the trap triggers and the snare toggles and the deadfall pieces that caught the small game the gun would have been a waste on. It split the kindling and pointed the fishing spear and notched the trees to mark a trail he could find again in the snow. It dug a man out of trouble and dug him into shelter, scraping a hollow in a snowbank, prying a stone, levering a log. It shaved tinder when the rain had soaked everything and the dry was only to be found deep in the heart of a dead branch. When a man needed water and found only ice, the knife chipped through to it, When he needed to reach the sap or the inner bark that could be eaten in the starving times, the knife opened the tree. Not one of these tasks was dramatic. Not one of them would make a story a man would tell by the fire. But it was the sum of all these small, quiet uses, 10,000 of them across a hard life, that built the old-timer's trust into something close to devotion. The gun was for the rare, loud moment. The knife was for the endless, ordinary ones. And a life is made of the ordinary moments far more than the rare ones. I think about all of this, the cheap little knife the old men trusted above their guns, and I think it tells us something true that goes well beyond the woods. We've got it backwards, most of us. We chase the powerful and neglect the dependable. We buy the dramatic tool and never learn to use it, while the humble tool that would actually serve us sits ignored. We believe the value is in the thing we own when the value is always in what we know and how well we tend it. The old mountain man, with his $2 blade kept scary sharp and never out of reach, knew better. He had stripped his life down to what truly worked, and he had mastered it so completely that the simple thing did the work of a dozen complicated ones. He did not need more. He needed to know what he had, deeply, and to care for it faithfully. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was a whole life lived free and fed and warm in a country that would have killed a man who needed more and knew less. The knife is still just a knife. You can hold one in your hand today that is not much different from the one that old-timer trusted his life to. The steel is the same. The edge takes the same care. The skill is still there to be learned by any man willing to learn it. The shelter and the fire and the dressing of game and the 100 quiet tasks of staying alive. None of it has changed at all. What changed is us. We stopped learning the simple things because we were sold the idea that buying the complicated thing was easier and better. The old men would tell you it is neither. They would tell you to pick one good, simple blade, learn it until it is part of your own hand, keep it sharp, keep it close, and trust the knowledge in yourself far more than the gear on your back. That is what they trusted in the end. Not the gun, not even really the knife. They trusted themselves, and the blade was just the humble, faithful tool through which all that hard-won knowing did its work. The gun was for the rare hour. The knife was for the life, and the old men chose the life every time.